Hi, we're out on the range today, so please bear with gunfire you hear in the background. Today, once again, we're talking about shotguns in their role as a home defense firearm, specifically shotguns loaded with birdshot, and even more specifically, shotguns loaded with turkey ammunition. But before we can get to questions like, what is turkey ammo and how is it different than regular birdshot? Does turkey ammunition really give you an advantage over other types of birdshot in a home defense situation? There's a few things we have to cover. One of those is, previously we've done presentations entitled Introduction to Shotguns, Shotguns Don't Suck for Home Defense, and Birdshot in your home defense shotgun. So in an effort to minimize the redundancy, today I'm going to give you a really abbreviated version of some things. Also, the question comes up, when you could load with buckshot or slugs, why would you load your home defense shotgun with birdshot? There may be many reasons, but primarily two of them. One, according to the sources I see, there are some countries and some jurisdictions where people are allowed to have shotguns, allowed to have birdshot, but buckshot is either prohibited or requires a special permit to get it, so people would load with birdshot because that's what they have. The other reason is because you believe that birdshot will have an adequate effect on the intended target, but when compared to buckshot or slugs, birdshot will reduce your potential for collateral damage due to overpenetration. And as we have seen in previous presentations, birdshot does penetrate less through sheetrock and solid than buckshot does. Now, one other thing is there are people who remain steadfastly convinced that birdshot will be completely ineffective against the intended target in a home defense shooting. Let's see if we can do a demonstration on the effectiveness of birdshot. The test medium we're going to use is something I call the meat target. And for those who haven't seen it before, it's leather jacket skin followed by pork steak pectoral, pork ribs, a bag of oranges to simulate lung tissue, more pork ribs on the back, 4 layers of t-shirt on the front, 4 layers on the back, and the whole thing followed by the new and improved high-tech fleece bullet stop. And I'm going to use my Mossberg 500 shotgun, which has a 20-inch improved cylinder bore barrel. The ammunition I'm going to load it with will be Remington 12 gauge, 2 3/4 inch, 1 1/4 ounce of number 6 lead birdshot. That's about as standard of a standard 12 gauge load as you can get. Now, in a home defense shooting, we expect our distance to be very short, 3, 4, 5 yards. I'm going to shoot this from 7 yards, and let's see how effective our birdshot is. Well, our birdshot pulverized our pork chop pectoral. It also perforated our pork ribs and tore up our orange lung tissue. Now, some of these pellets made it through to the ribs on the back of the target, but none went through. So we see very little potential for overpenetration, but would birdshot be effective against the intended target? I'm going to say probably yes, which brings us to our question, would turkey ammo be more effective? Well, first we'd have to answer the question, what is turkey ammo? So what's the difference between turkey ammunition and other types of shot shells? This is a subject that I could go on about for half an hour, but I'm going to try to condense it as much as I can. And the first thing to say is that there are a lot of different types of shotguns. Different gauges, 12, 16, 20, the list goes on. There's many different types of projectiles, slugs, buckshot, birdshot, flechettes, flares. That list goes on ad astra. But even within the confines of just birdshot, there can still be a great deal of variation. The weight of the shot charge, the size of the pellets are just small spheres, the materials with which those pellets are made, and the velocity at which those pellets are propelled. All of these things can vary quite a bit. And you use different types of ammunition for different applications. For example, if you were hunting quail are fairly small and usually shot at relatively close distances. So you're going to want something like a small birdshot, therefore a high pellet count, a good pattern density to hit the small quail. You also don't need a great deal of velocity. Quail are small and don't need an overly powerful round to kill them. And sometimes you'll want a lower velocity round because it can be less expensive and a lot less damaging to your shoulder when you're shooting a lot of rounds. Brings up the top of the bag limit. The numbers can vary in different places, but typically you have a hunting season that's a given number of days, and then you have a bag limit per day. You can shoot 6 quail on Monday, 6 quail on Tuesday, and so on. And when you're shooting that many quail, a less powerful round that doesn't beat your shoulder up might be a good idea. Now, by contrast, when you shoot something like pheasants are bigger and typically farther away. so you might want a more powerful 12-gauge round. Now, these two types of ammunition make a good comparison. This is Remington Pheasant ammunition, and Winchester just target ammunition, which is what a lot of people would use for hunting smaller game like quail. And it's an 1.25 ounce shot versus an 1 1/8 ounce. And the muzzle velocity advertised on this box is 185 feet per second more than the velocity advertised on this box, and this ammunition is significantly more expensive. Now, when it comes to hunting turkeys, that's a different thing. The way turkeys are hunted is very typically different than the way you hunt pheasant. And of course, different people will do things in different areas. But when you shoot grouse, quail, pheasant, they're usually flying. In fact, it's considered unsportsmanlike to shoot one on the ground. But by contrast, although wild turkeys can fly, they most of the time prefer not to, and you end up shooting them on the ground. Also, the bag limit for turkeys is very different. As where with grouse or quail you might be allowed 6 per day, in most jurisdictions for turkeys you're allowed 1, 2, 3 per season. And when you hunt turkeys, usually someone is wearing a lot of camo and they're hiding in a stand or just sitting there leaning against a tree trying to be still, using some kind of turkey call to draw that turkey in, and very often those turkeys are shot on the ground at significantly farther distances than you'd shoot a grouse or a pheasant. Now, when I say that, it sounds like turkey hunting is more like deer hunting than it is bird hunting, and in many ways, and for many people, it is. And you might think you'd be better off with a medium-powered rifle, and you might be. And the reason you don't use a rifle is because it's prohibited in virtually every jurisdiction. You're required to use a shotgun. But because turkeys are big, fairly far away, and they can have some really thick, tough feathers, a lot of times your birdshot won't penetrate all that well. And so the tactic that is commonly used is, you of course use whatever shotgun you can, but hopefully you have one with a full or extra full choke and a very high pellet count so you can have a dense pattern, because you're trying to shoot that turkey in the head and get enough pellets into his head or neck so you can do enough damage to his central nervous system to drop him right there. So the concept of turkey ammunition is that it has a lead or copper-plated lead projectile and usually a much heavier shot charge than other types of ammo. For example, this Remington turkey ammunition, when compared to the Remington pheasant ammunition, both are 12-gauge 2 3/4 inch, but it's an 1.5 ounce of shot versus an 1.25 ounce of shot. This Winchester turkey ammunition is 3-inch, but it's an 1.75 ounces of shot. This Federal ammunition is 12-gauge 3-inch with 2 ounces of lead birdshot. This type of ammo can be very expensive. It typically comes in boxes of 10, which typically cost as much as a box of 25 of the other stuff. It's sometimes made with a higher quality shot, like copper-plated shot instead of straight lead. And this ammunition can have brutal recoil. But that's okay that it's more expensive and has a lot more recoil, because remember, you're not firing near as many rounds as you would be at other types of game birds. So when it comes to the application of this type of ammo for home defense, what would be the plus? Well, the plus would be a lot more shot, and the thought that it's a lot more powerful. But is it? Very commonly, when you buy shotgun ammunition, as you get heavier and heavier charges of shot, in an effort to avoid excessive chamber pressure, you get a lot lower velocities. So even though it has more shot, it might not necessarily be more powerful in a pellet per pellet sense. So let's go to the chronograph and see what we can learn about that. I've got the chronograph set up at 4 yards. Typically I shoot it at 7, but when using a shotgun with multiple projectile rounds, 4 is safer for the chronograph. And I have my Remington 870 with an 18.5 inch cylinder bore barrel, and I have it loaded with our Remington 12-gauge 2 3/4 inch 1 1/4 ounce of shot. .1236, 1263, 1239, 1254, and 1225. Now let's see how that compares to some of our high-dollar turkey ammunition. Now we have our Remington Premier Magnum turkey loads, which is 12 gauge, 2 3/4 inch, 1.5 ounces a shot. $11.84, $11.87, $11.09, $10.97, $10.11, and $12.06. That was some really inconsistent readings with those Premier Magnum turkey loads. Let's try 2 more shots. $11.95 and $11.60. Let's try another type of ammo. Now we have our Winchester Longbeard locked and lethal ammunition, which is 12 gauge, 3 inch, 1 3/4 ounce a shot. $11.61, $1,052, $1,010, $1,032, $12.07, and $11.64. Let's try another type of ammo. Now we have our Federal Premium turkey loads with flight control wad, 12 gauge, 3 inch, 2 ounces a shot. $1,060, $1,010, $1,088, $1,048, and $1,037. Now let's go crunch some numbers. Well, I crunched the numbers, and it comes with the normal caveats that chronographs don't always agree with each other, and certain environmental factors like elevation and ambient temperature can affect chronograph results. However, today's results come with a few more caveats. In shooting our Remington Premier Magnum ammunition, we got a couple of inconsistent results. So I shot a couple more rounds and then took that one reading that was really strangely low and took that out of the equation. With our Winchester Longbeard ammunition, I got a lot of really inconsistent results. Now that may be because the ammunition is inconsistent. It may be because of the way it patterns was giving inconsistent readings in my chronograph. It may have been just me. But off camera, I fired quite a few more rounds and then picked out those readings that I thought were the most consistent to get the mean we see on our chart. And with our Federal Premium ammunition, those seem to be really consistent. So the numbers I came up with were 1243, 1162, 1145, and 1048. As expected, as we get heavier charges of shot, we get lower velocities. Now, going from 1162 to 1145 isn't enough to talk about. But from 1145 to 1048, that's a loss of 97 feet per second. That's significant. From 1243 to 1048, that's a loss of 195 feet per second. That's a lot. So even though this ammunition has 2 ounces of shot, which is a lot more than 1.25 ounces, its effectiveness might not really be any more in a home defense type shooting because it has so much less velocity. Remember, the greater amounts of shot are supposed to increase your maximum effective range by giving you more pattern density when you're trying to shoot a turkey in the head. That reasoning doesn't really apply at the maybe 5 yards you're going to shoot in a home defense shooting. Now there's one more type of ammunition I want to test, and that's Winchester Super Pheasant ammunition. So we have Remington Pheasant ammo, Winchester Super Pheasant. What's the difference? They're both 12 gauge, both 2 3/4, both have very similar advertised velocities. There's 2 main differences. This is 1 1/4 ounce of shot, this is 1 3/8, an extra 1/8 of an ounce. Is that really enough to matter? Again, yes and no. Now, different charts will read different things, but 1 1/4 ounce of number 6 lead birdshot is going to be about 235 to 240 pellets. So an 1/8 ounce is going to be 20 to 25 pellets. Going from 240 to about 260 something, would that really matter? And the answer is, depending on your gun and what it is you're trying to shoot with it, yes, it can matter. Sometimes that can add about an extra 5 yards of maximum effective range. And when your maximum effective range was only 30 or 40 yards to start with, adding 5 can be significant. But again, getting greater pattern density for more maximum effective range doesn't apply in our home defense shooting. But what might make the difference is, this is lead birdshot, this is copper-plated shot, making it more resistant to deformation, so you might get some better penetration out of it. But before we talk about penetration, let's take this stuff to the chronograph and see what kind of velocities we get out of it. So let's try our Super Pheasant ammo. $11.89, $11.03, $11.86, $11.89, $11.31, and $12.07. Now let's go crunch those numbers. Well, I crunched the numbers and came up with a mean velocity of 1167. That's 76 feet per second less than this. So it looks like the Winchester is pretty good ammo, but I don't know if I'd call it super unless they were talking about a super high price, which it did have. But after crunching all these numbers, that's all it is crunching numbers, and they don't necessarily reflect the effectiveness of the different ammunitions on the target. Now, we've already seen what kind of effect we got on the meat target with this. Let's go back to the meat target and try some of these turkey ammunitions and see what they actually do. Now I've got a new meat target set up, and I have my Mossberg 500 loaded with our Winchester Longbeard Locked and Lethal 12 gauge 3-inch 1 3/4 ounce of number 4 shot. Let's see how this does from 7 yards. Now, in shooting this meat target with our Locked and Lethal ammunition, got some really interesting results. Earlier when we shot the Remington Pheasant ammunition, the pattern spread out a little, but the vast majority of the pellets were still in a pretty tight pattern, and it put a big hole in our pork steak pectoral. In this case, it really didn't. It just chewed them up quite a bit, because this pattern is already spreading out a lot, even at the relatively short distance of 7 yards. As where before we saw one big hole in the center of our ribs, now there isn't. The pellets are really spread out. Now, most of them did go through the ribs on the front, and one of the ribs is broken, but we don't see that centralized main core of our pattern. In our orange lung tissue, just about every orange in this bag has some holes in it, but very little in the sense of centralized damage. Now, this shell has copper-plated shot, which I said might give us more penetration. Remember, this has significantly less velocity than the pheasant load we used earlier, and even at lower velocity we did see more penetration. As where the Remington Pheasant ammunition, some of the pellets got to the ribs on the back, but none actually penetrated. In this case, there's a lot of penetration in these ribs, although no evidence that any of the pellets made it all the way through. So we still see very little potential for over-penetration. But what we really got here is ammunition that cost a lot more, has a whole lot more recoil, and even though it has quite a bit more shot, is arguably not doing any more damage, in fact, maybe less. Now, off camera, I shot another meat target with the same ammunition and got the same result. Also, these results might shed some light on why we were getting such inconsistent readings with this ammo through the chronograph, because even at a really short range, that pattern is spreading out quite a bit, making it harder for the chronograph to read it. So let's try another type of ammo. Now let's try our Federal Premium ammunition. Even though this has low velocity at 1048, it does have 2 ounces of copper-plated number 6 Birdshot and the Federal Flight Control wad. Let's see how this does from 7 yards. Well, there's our pork steak pectoral. And here's our ribs on the front of the target, and you can see a pretty big hole in there. We also have just some real orange puree lung tissue, but there's also the ribs on the back of the target, which seem to have a very big hole in them. And then there's this other thing, this wad of orange puree and copper-plated shot and bits of meat. At the center of that is the flight control wad, which gave us 100% penetration and was stopped by the first layer of fleece. So it would appear that this ammunition is going to be very effective and still have very little potential for overpenetration because everything was stopped by the first layer of fleece. So this comes back to our two big questions, one being, can birdshot be effective in your home defense shotgun? Yes. And the second one being, is turkey ammunition going to be more effective than your typical pheasant ammunition? And I'd have to say, if you buy the right turkey ammunition, again the answer is yes. But there's a downside here. This federal premium turkey ammunition has prohibitive recoil. Some people are just not going to want to shoot this. So are there some effective alternatives for people who don't want to deal with 12-gauge 3-inch Magnum? Let's try a different type of shotgun. Now this is a Mossberg Maverick 88 20-gauge shotgun, and this is a really cool turkey camo shot shell vest. Now we've already done a presentation on 20-gauge shotguns in their role as a home defense firearm, so there will be a little bit of redundant material today. But I do want to compare some regular ammo to our turkey ammunition. And I'm wearing this vest because it's cool turkey camo, sometimes called duck hunter, but I'm going to call it turkey camo. And because a viewer sent it to me, thank you, and because it's one of those rare sunny warm days at the range. Now the ammunition I'm going to start with is this Remington 20-gauge 2 3/4 inch 1 ounce of lead birdshot. 1166, 1151, 1202, 1150, and 1178. Now let's compare that to a couple of other types of ammo. Now this is Winchester Super X ammunition, which is also 20-gauge 2 3/4 inch 1 ounce of lead birdshot. But as where the Remington ammunition was labeled pheasant loads, this is labeled heavy game load. But it still has a picture of a pheasant on the box. Let's see how this does. 1146, 1195, 1145, 1169, and 1135. Now let's see how those stack up against some turkey ammo. Now let's try this Remington Nitro Turkey, which is 20-gauge 3-inch 1 1/4 ounce of shot. 1100, 1092, 1106, 1103, and 1093. Now let's try one more type of ammo. Now I'm loaded with the Winchester Super X Super Pheasant ammunition, which is 20-gauge 3-inch 1 1/4 ounce of shot. Interesting thing about this ammo, at least as it relates to this gun, this shotgun has a capacity of 5+1. It has a 5-shot tube. When you load it with 2 3/4 inch shells, you get 5 rounds in with a little bit to spare. When loading with the Remington 3-inch ammunition, I can get 5 rounds in with virtually nothing to spare. This Winchester ammunition is just enough longer that I can't actually get 5 rounds in the tube. Just an interesting point. So let's chronograph this stuff. 1225, 1196, 1234, 1200, and 1211. Now let's go crunch the numbers. So I crunched the numbers, and with our Remington Pheasant ammunition, we've got a mean velocity of 1,169. So the 20-gauge Pheasant ammunition is giving us less velocity than its equivalent 12-gauge, which is what we expected. Now with the Super X heavy game load, we get a mean velocity of 1,158, 11 feet per second less. That's within the variation of one round to the next, and not enough difference to talk about. But when we go from ammunition with 1 ounce to ammunition with 1 1/4 ounce, we expect to lose velocity, and that's just what we got in our Nitro Turkey ammunition. With 1 1/4 ounce of shot, we got a mean velocity of 1,098. That's 71 feet per second less than the Remington Pheasant ammunition. But with our Winchester Super X Super Pheasant ammo, now that's 1 1/4 ounces of shot, and we got a mean velocity of 1,213. That's 44 feet per second more, 55 feet per second more. That's significantly more. So we've got 1 1/4 ounces versus 1 ounce, more shot, more velocity, and it's copper-plated shot instead of just straight lead. So that seems very impressive, but let's see what it'll do to a meat target. And as a basis of comparison, we'll start with our Remington Pheasant ammunition, which is 20 gauge, 2 3/4 inch, 1 ounce of number 5 lead Birdshot. And again, we'll shoot from 7 yards. So we see a lot of damage to our pork steak pectoral, a lot of damage to our ribs on the front of the target, significant damage to our orange lung tissue, and although some of the pellets made it through to the ribs on the back of the target, none of them actually penetrated those ribs. So it looks like our 20 gauge pheasant ammunition is going to be effective. Now let's try our Winchester Super Pheasant ammunition and see if we get a super effect out of it. And now our Winchester Super X Super Pheasant 20 gauge 3 inch 1 1/4 ounce of number 5 copper plated shot, and again we'll shoot from 7 yards. Well, there's our pork steak pectoral. And we see a lot of damage to our ribs on the front of the target, a lot of damage to our orange lung tissue. In fact, some of the meat from the pork steak pectoral was carried into the orange lung tissue. And again, we see that some of the pellets made it through to the ribs on the back of the target, but none actually penetrated the ribs. So even though our Remington regular pheasant ammunition was effective, it does appear that our Winchester Super Pheasant ammunition was more so. Now there's one more thing I want to add, and that is that I am not encouraging or discouraging the use of birdshot in your home defense shotgun. As we've seen today and in previous presentations, with the right ammunition selection, both in 12 gauge and 20 gauge, birdshot at typical home defense distances can be very effective. And remember, today I was shooting at 7 yards. In a home defense shooting, it's very likely the range would even be shorter than that. And for some people with jurisdictional or legal concerns or over-penetration concerns, birdshot may be a good choice. Now for today's topic of can you enhance the effect of birdshot by spending more money in buying the Super Pheasant or some type of turkey ammunition, it would appear that with the right ammunition choices, the answer to that question is yes. So as always, don't try this at home on what you call a professional, and thanks for watching the Turkey Ammo in Your Home Defense Shotgun video.